1405. The docks at Xiaoguan, outside Nanjing. Over 200 treasure ships raised their sails at once, banners blotting out the sky, lined up like a dragon stretching across the water. The flagship runs past 100 meters. Nearly 30,000 men stand on the decks. On shore, drums and gongs roar. The entire court lines up to see them off, and crowds pack the riverbank as far as you can see. Nothing like this had ever existed before, and no other nation would match it for centuries. By sheer scale, China should have been the one to redraw the map of the world, but the one that actually redrew it wasn't this giant. It was the small, shivering, dirt-poor kingdom on the other side of the planet. Portugal, population under 1 million. Why? This episode isn't about whose ships were bigger. It's about why a civilization holding every possible advantage still couldn't hold on to it long enough to matter. And here's where it gets strange. What you're about to see is that Zheng He's voyage may never have been the story it appears to be. The two official reasons, written into the history books, are about to be taken apart, piece by piece, by a chain of evidence buried in the timeline itself. Let's put the numbers on the table first, so you can feel just how absurd this gap really is. On the Ming side, over 27,000 men, more than 200 large and medium ships, flagships, past 100 meters long. This is what an entire centralized empire's industrial base looks like when it's pushed to its limit. Every ship launched meant timber, iron, silk, and grain pulled from across the entire Yangtze Delta, a supply chain stretching across hundreds of thousands of hands. Portugal, the whole kingdom had under 1 million people. Prince Henry's navigation school at Sagres was just a low wall and a few small buildings perched on a cliff, more workshop than institution, staring straight out at an Atlantic everyone at the time believed had no end. He usually sent out 2 or 3 modified little caravels at a time, a few dozen men aboard, built to feel their way blindly down unknown coastlines, and any one of them could simply vanish, with no word ever making it home. This isn't a contest between equals. One side is a state machine running at full capacity. The other is a handful of people gambling everything on a single breath held too long. And yet the answer history handed down runs completely against the logic of scale. So why did Portugal win? The answer is buried somewhere more hidden, in the real reason Zheng He's fleet ever existed in the first place. The official reason sounds respectable enough. Find the missing genuine emperor and show the world the wealth and power of the Celestial Empire. But that reason doesn't line up with something else that was happening at the exact same time. Zheng He seized his throne himself in the Jingnan campaign. He was a battle-hardened ruler who actually understood war, mobilizing the entire nation to build a regular fleet of over 20,000 men just to chase down a nephew who'd been missing for years? That doesn't add up. So who was he really afraid of? Not the Mongol remnants limping along in the northern steppe. It was the man at the peak of his power out west, Tamerlane. Tamerlane had once detained a Ming envoy for weeks, humiliated and held. After Zheng He took the throne, he tried again, and his envoys were left waiting outside Tamerlane's court, refused an audience, sent home in disgrace, humiliated all over again. In the winter of 1404, at Samarkand, 200,000 cavalry began to gather. Supply wagons stretched farther than the eye could see, rolling east along the Silk Road. Hooves cracked the ice on frozen rivers. Tamerlane had one target: destroy the Ming. China's entire northwestern frontier spent that winter in genuine dread, reinforcing fortifications through the night, officers too tense to take off their armor. The turning point came in February 1405. Tamerlane fell ill on the march and died at Otrar. But the overland intelligence line between Central Asia and Nanjing had already been completely severed by the fighting. Nanjing had no idea. The entire court still believed 200,000 cavalry were on their way, that the frontier could fall at any moment, and every fragment of news from the west pulled the tension a little tighter. 5 months later, in July 1405, Zheng He gave the order. Zheng He took this unprecedented fleet out of the mouth of the Yangtze for the first time. Lay this timeline out, and the conclusion almost writes itself. With 200,000 cavalry sealing off the land route, and the intelligence line dead, opening an uncontested second front by sea, hunting for allies, gathering intel, was about the only move left on the board. And look at where Zheng He's fleet actually went. Calicut, Hormuz, both sitting right on the southern edge of Tamerlane's empire, right on his economic lifeline. One a spice hub on India's western coast, the other a fortified trading post at the mouth of the Persian Gulf. Both perfect lookout points into the heart of Central Asia. Most of the crew are regular military, infantry, cavalry, archers, even gunners. This wasn't a diplomatic mission. This was a strategic reserve, ready to land on the enemy's flank and rip open a second front on a moment's notice. So why doesn't a single official record mention any of this? Simple. The Ming called itself ruler of all under heaven, admitting it was scared enough of a warlord out west to send a fleet to spy on him. That was humiliating. So the official line had to be spreading civilization, rewarding vassal states, repackaging a pure act of geopolitical defense as a grand tribute parade. Then Tamerlane's empire collapsed into a succession war, and the threat vanished overnight. The original military purpose of the voyages just quietly faded away. This can never be proven 100%, but the chain of evidence is unsettling enough on its own. Zheng He's voyage may have been history's first naval flanking maneuver, crossing the Pacific and the Indian Ocean to outflank an empire buried deep in Central Asia. If this theory holds, the entire meaning of Zheng He's fleet has to be rewritten, and the fleet that was originally built just to defend the empire was about to do something far bigger than anyone could have planned for. Once the Tamerlane threat lifted, what was left were two completely different engines, one running on giving, the other on taking. On the Ming side, Zheng He carried gifts. You bring tribute, I reward you with something worth far more than what you brought. That's give generously, take modestly. The goal was political prestige, not hard profit. On the Portuguese side, Prince Henry had the crown, military orders, and merchant capital all funding him at once. And the goal was blunt. Break the Ottoman monopoly on the spice trade. Go get gold, ivory, slaves. The model was armed commerce. Build forts, run trading posts, settle disputes with cannons. One side spends the treasury to buy prestige. The other uses cannons to collect a profit. These two engines will send the two fleets down completely different tracks. One will eventually be dragged to a stop by the treasury. The other will spin faster and faster, getting hungrier the more it takes. One is a state-funded spectacle, bought with subsidies. The other is a private engine feeding on guns and capital, one that never needs a king's permission to keep running. What happens next pushes each of these logics to its absolute extreme. Whatever the original motive was, what Zheng He left behind across these waters was an entire tributary system with the Ming at its center, one that held for over half a century. Call it a Pax Sinica. On his first voyage, Zheng He ran into Chen Zuyi, a Chinese pirate boss operating out of Palembang. He crushed the pirate fleet outright and dragged Chen Zuyi back to Nanjing for trial. And just like that, the Strait of Malacca was open for business. Every state in Southeast Asia took notice. He also propped up Malacca, back then just a fishing village squeezed between Siam and Majapahit. He made its chief a king, made Malacca the official forward base for the voyages, and warned Siam to keep its hands off. Under Ming protection, Malacca quickly grew into Southeast Asia's most important trading port. Wherever the fleet landed, Zheng He read Zhu Di's edict aloud in public and handed over the Ming calendar. Ceremonial robes, silk, and gold or silver seals marking legitimate rule. To the Ming, this ceremony was an act of imperial grace. To the local rulers, it was a piece of political insurance that let them walk taller in the region. Zheng He himself showed remarkable religious tolerance. The stone tablet he raised in Sri Lanka still stands there today, Chinese, Tamil, and Persian, carved into it side by side, honoring 3 different gods at once. No faith was left out. The kings of Sulu, Brunei, and Malacca, won over by this mix of charm and pressure, personally followed the fleet all the way to Nanjing to meet the emperor. And the kings of Sulu and Brunei both fell ill and died during their visit. Zhu Di buried them with the full honors of a Ming prince. Today, the Sulu king's tomb is still in Dezhou, Shandong. The Brunei king's tomb is still in Nanjing. 2 foreign kings, buried quietly on Chinese soil. The most concrete, most weighted proof this entire system ever existed. There's a more practical reason this system kept turning. With a strict maritime ban in place, the only legal way for Southeast Asian states to get Chinese silk, porcelain, and ironware was through tribute. For them, It was a deal that couldn't lose. Political protection on one side, guaranteed profit on the other. And it was under this exact order that Chinese merchants, sailors, and craftsmen started settling in Malacca, Java, Sumatra, paving the way for the much larger Chinese migration into Southeast Asia that came later. The Muslim crew members aboard Zheng He's ships, meanwhile, helped carry Islam to the coast and let it take root there. But the cost of this order was a Ming treasury willing to bankrupt itself for prestige, year after year. After the seventh and final voyage in 1433, with the Mongol threat rising in the north and the treasury running dry, critics inside the court started tearing into the whole program as a waste. Zheng He himself never made it back to shore smiling. The records say he died on the journey home from this seventh voyage, likely somewhere off the coast near Calicut, the very place he'd once sailed toward on his first flanking maneuver. A man who carried order across half the known world ended up leaving his own life out there on the water. In the end, the Ming didn't just stop sailing. It burned the navigational archives and decreed that not a single plank would ever sail to sea again. In the moment those archives burned, decades of shipbuilding and navigational expertise just dissolved. The age of maritime power was about to open its doors, and the Ming tore up its own ticket with its own hands. And on the other side of the planet, that torn-up ticket was about to land in someone else's hands. Portugal was playing a different game entirely, turning every voyage into the seed money for the next one. Prince Henry never sailed himself, not once. That school on the cliff at Sagres was really a precision compound interest machine. Every new route opened up brought back gold, ivory, pepper, and that funded the next expedition immediately. Push the route one more mile south, and the next round of investment got a little bolder. Every outpost along the coast was both a supply station and collateral for the next round of funding. After Henry died, the navigators he'd trained kept pushing. Diaz rounded the Cape of Good Hope. Da Gama sailed straight into the Indian Ocean. This African coastline, once considered impossible to pass, was paved into a route generation after generation. Paid for in bodies and debt, every failed expedition written off as a sunk cost, every ship that made it home reloaded and sent straight back out. This small kingdom on the edge of Europe leapt, in one move, into becoming history's first truly global maritime empire. What Zheng He brought was order and peace. More a stern, generous mediator making his rounds, then heading home to his farms and shutting the gate behind him. What Prince Henry unleashed was hunger and ambition. The Portuguese moved more like a pack of wolves, breaking the old balance, but using ships, cannons, and capital to stitch together continents that had stood apart for all of human history. The world spent the next 500 years digesting how that stitching was done. The year the Ming sealed its own ocean gate shut, Portugal was kicking the world's doors open, one after another. The fates of these two fleets split apart for good right here, but history is hiding an even more ironic detail. These two nations very nearly ended up as allies. This part borders on absurd. The monopolist Portugal was desperate to rout around was the Ottoman Empire. It had a death grip on the eastern Mediterranean and the entire old Silk Road, taxing every ounce of eastern spice and every bolt of silk so heavily that European merchants couldn't trade directly at all. That's the real reason Prince Henry threw everything into finding a new route. And the man Ming feared most, Tamerlane, had already crushed that same Ottoman Empire back in 1402 at the Battle of Ankara, wiping out Sultan Bayezid I's main army, parading the captured sultan in a cage, and very nearly ending Ottoman expansion for good. In other words, on the eve of Zheng He's first voyage, the man Ming feared most was the exact same man who had already conquered the monopolist Portugal was trying to get around. By the oldest rule in the jungle, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Ming and Portugal actually shared a hidden geopolitical interest. Both were being choked by the same set of powers, both hunting for a sea route around the same land-based threats. If anyone back then had connected these dots, the map of the world today might look nothing like it does. But history never gave these two unacquainted potential allies the chance to find each other. By the time Portuguese ships rounded Africa, crossed the Indian Ocean, and finally touched the edge of Ming's world, more than a century had passed. Tamerlane was long dead. The threat was long gone. Ming's original alertness had faded into pure ceremony. The Portuguese arrived running on the logic of armed commerce, walking straight into an imperial protocol they couldn't begin to read, and not a single Ming official ever stopped to ask what these phalangi had actually traveled so far to find. Two civilizations that could have shaken hands instead carried their mutual ignorance forward, step by step, straight into a collision nobody saw coming. A century earlier, Ming had feared Tamerlane's cavalry. A century later, Ming itself had become the unreadable, unpredictable stranger in Portuguese eyes. And that collision starts with a city falling. 1511. Beneath the walls of Malacca, the Portuguese Viceroy Afonso de Albuquerque storms the city and takes it. Sultan Mahmud Shah flees in chaos. This was the exact city Zheng He had once made his official forward base. The exiled king runs straight to Beijing, pleading that the phalangi are brutal and savage, that they've stolen his land. The Ming Board of Rights brands the Portuguese as lawless bandits on the spot. The fire is lit. In 1517, the Portuguese envoy Tomé Pires forces his way into Beijing, hoping to open up the Chinese market. He figures a state letter and some gifts will be enough to win equal trading terms, the same way it worked with every smaller kingdom they'd already conquered along the way. But his letter never calls Portugal a vassal. It speaks to the emperor as an equal. At the same time, word arrives from Guangdong. Portuguese soldiers are building forts on the coast, firing cannons as a show of force, and rumored to be kidnapping locals. The moment the Jiajing emperor takes the throne, Ming policy turns to iron overnight. Pires is thrown in prison. An imperial order goes out. Expel every Portuguese national. Kill on sight anyone who dares come back. The door to diplomacy slams shut for good. 1521. The waters off Tunmen. The Portuguese fleet shows up with its signature breech-loading cannons, firepower and range completely outclassing the Ming Navy. The first exchange goes badly. Ming cannonballs can't even reach the enemy ships, and chaos breaks out on deck. But Wang Hong, the regional naval commander, doesn't fight head-on. He bribes Chinese technicians working aboard the Portuguese ships and gets his hands on the cannon's casting formula. Then he waits for a dead calm morning, when the big Portuguese ships can't maneuver, and sends out a pack of shallow draft, wolf quick-fire ships, surrounding them on every side, lighting them up all at once. Fire lights up the entire sea. Portuguese warships catch one after another, masts snapping, smoke rolling thick over the waves. The survivors flee back to Malacca under cover of darkness, beaten. This battle left behind an unexpected result. After seeing what Western artillery could do, Ming didn't look away. It launched what might be history's first large-scale program of military reverse engineering, mass-producing phalangi muskets that went on to become a core weapon against Mongol and Manchu cavalry. The ships that burned off Tunmen ended up living on, decades later, inside the Ming arsenal, just in a different form. The Western visitor, who might have been an ally, ended up leaving its technology on this soil anyway, just through a war nobody saw coming, the ugliest possible way to finish an exchange that could have happened with dignity. Two fleets, two logics. Together they decided the balance of power between East and West for the next 500 years. History doesn't judge which civilization's choice deserves more admiration, but it keeps a precise record of one thing. When a civilization holds an overwhelming advantage in technology and organization, what decides whether that advantage turns into lasting historical standing is never the scale itself. It's the institutional engine behind the voyage, whether exploration itself can sustain and multiply on its own, whether it can find a reason to keep going without an emperor's permission. Ming had everything at the start: the fleet, the technology, the wealth, the prestige to command nations, but it couldn't hold on to that advantage to the end. Portugal had almost nothing and turned every voyage into the funding for the next one anyway, and that missed alliance. Maybe that's the part of this story most worth sitting with. No one's fault, really. Just the price a world that hadn't been stitched together yet charged two lone voyagers who never knew the other existed. This is Kong Su's history. In the long river of time, what we're searching for is the fragile, golden line that leads toward freedom,